recorded for record-keeping purposes. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. This meeting is now being live streamed. Thank you. Please proceed.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mary Soderberg. I'm Chair of the Finance and Member Services Committee. I would like to call to order the committee meeting of Finance and Member Services for September 28, 2021 at 9:06 a.m. Sarah McSturdy, may we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'll start with Senator DeSanto.
Here.
Chairman Philman.
Present.
I didn't really get what was happening before, but is Representative Frankel here?
Dan
Alco's designee is on the line.
Okay, thank you. Committee Chair Soderberg.
Here.
And Secretary Begg.
Hi, this is Alan, Secretary Begg's designee, sitting in his behalf.
Good morning, Alan. We have a representative for everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. The first order of business is the approval of the July 27th meeting minutes. A motion is in order to approve the minutes of July 27th, 2021 of the Finance and Member Services Committee meeting. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Right, thank you. The motion passes. We have no old business on our agenda. The first agenda item is a special presentation on stress testing. So I will turn it over to Michael McGoey, our Assistant CFO, to kick this one off. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael McGoey, the Assistant CFO. The Korn Ferry team is with us today to provide you with a summary presentation of the 2021 Stress Testing Risk Assessment Report. A copy of their presentation and the full report can be found on Board Docs under Agenda Item 5A. Since we have some new committee and board members, I would like to provide you with a little bit of background before Korn Ferry gets into their presentation. This is the third stress test report produced for CSRS. The first report was issued in December 2019 in response to recommendations made in the Public Pension Management and Asset Investment Review Commission, otherwise known as the PPMAIRC report. The initial stress test report was reviewed by Pew Charitable Trusts, who regarded it as a, quote, leading example of pension stress tests. Although originally done voluntarily, I'm here to remind the committee that CSRS is now required by law to issue a stress test. Act 2020-128, which was passed in November of 2020, requires CSRS to submit the results of a stress test to the Governor, the General Assembly, and the Independent Fiscal Office on an annual basis. This past summer, CSRS provided the IFO a copy of the 2021 report on a trial run basis. The IFO confirmed that the report contained all of the information necessary for them to fulfill their statutory duties under the Act. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Chris Seitz and Craig Gravy from Korn Ferry to provide you a summary of the report.
Thank you, Michael. That's a great introduction to what this report is. I'm Chris Seitz, and I'm going to start us off. If we can please flip forward to page 2. So I'm going to, that one. I'll start us off with an introduction. Michael already covered some of that, and then I will walk through an outline of the scenarios that are included within the report, and then I'm going to hand it over to Craig to discuss some highlights, 3 of the scenarios that are specifically relevant to some of the recent discussions of the board. So if we can move forward to page 4. So when we refer to these scenarios or stress tests, what we're talking about are these what-if scenarios. So basically we come up with a set of conditions and say, well, what would that effect be? How would that affect the long-term funding of the plan? How would that affect the asset values, the contribution needs, the employer contribution rates? And this presentation that we're going to discuss this morning provides an outline of the full report. And the full report, as Michael said, is available on board docs for your review and if there's any other questions. So if we can move forward to page 5. The good news is that when we compare the results in this 2021 report, they are generally more favorable than the prior report that was completed around this time of 2020. Specifically, the projected employer contribution rates are lower, and the projected funded ratio is higher in the scenarios, which means CSRS will be better positioned to adjust to the risks that we view in this report. This is especially good because we said the same thing last year. So when we looked at 2020, CSRS was in a better position than in 2019. And now here we are again in 2020, again in a better, more favorable position. And again, over time, we have also moved toward more conservative assumptions about the future. We have since then reduced the investment return assumption to the current rate of 7%. We also, effective with this valuation, had adopted the new demographic assumptions from the experience study, which included the assumption that members will be living longer and therefore collecting benefits for a longer period. So the other thing to keep in mind is that CSRS assets are substantially higher now than they have been in the past. Specifically, if we look at 12/31/2019, the total fund value was about $31 billion. And right now we're projected to be at 12/31/21 just over $37 billion. And given at least investment performance is very unknown, but so far throughout the year it may be even higher than that, given how strong the performance has been thus far through the year. That's an increase of almost 20% in 2 years, so a very large increase. And one thing to keep in mind is that the more money that is invested, the larger the volatility will be, right? The bigger effect. We have a simple example at the bottom that a 10% loss on $31 billion is $3.1 billion, while a 10% loss on $37 billion is $3.7 billion. So that's an extra $600 million that wouldn't have to be made up by future favorable performance or by additional contributions from the employers. So again, it's good to have more money there, but it does increase the effect of investment volatility. If we can move forward to page 6. Some of the common terms that are used throughout the report are the ADC, which refers to the actuarially determined contribution. That's based on the CSRS funding policy. And basically, that's the policy that we use to determine the employer contribution rates for each fiscal year. We also look at the plan's funded ratio, which compares the actuarial value of assets to the accrued liability. The actuarial value of assets reflects the investment smoothing that we do, the asset smoothing, to help dampen the effect of investment volatility. And comparing to the liability just means we're comparing it to the expected value of the benefits that will be paid by the plan. For each scenario, we will compare the projected results under that scenario to what we refer to as a baseline. So the baseline is what we'll expect to happen based on all of our future assumptions being met. So we look at the results from the 12/31/2020 valuation, the most recent valuation, and we project that forward using all of our assumptions, assuming everything happens exactly to meet our expectations. We also adjusted to reflect the $825 million payment from PASHI for the advanced funding that was received in April of 2021. So when we look at all of our graphs and when you go through the report, consistently the baseline will be shown as a black line in each graph. And then in general, favorable projections will be shown as blue, while unfavorable projections, so an unfavorable such as a unfavorable investment performance, would be shown as a red line. We can move forward and jump ahead one more, please. So the report is organized into 3 sections of risks. So risks related to the investments, risks related to the demographics. So basically things related to the experience of the members or elections made by the members. And then contribution risks. So risks related to the contributions coming into the plan differing from the amount that is recommended or set based on the CSRS funding policy. We can move forward to slide 9. The first section being the investment risks. The investments are the largest source of volatility in the plan's funding. I mean, again, we can see how large the assets have grown. We've had very favorable performance in recent years. But it's important to know that, again, there is a lot of volatility in the markets. We know this will happen over time, and it's important for the board to understand what the effects will be. Within this section, today we're going to highlight 2 of the scenarios. Scenario 2.3, which is related to investment liquidity. We wanted to highlight that because of the recent changes in the investment policy statement. And then also 2.4, which we refer to as stochastic analysis. So that's simulating future investment performance. So we worked with Callan to attain basically output from a model of all of the different volatility projections to recognize that although we're assuming 7% return in each year, we know that it won't be 7% in each year. We know that there will be a lot of volatility. There'll be a large chance that will be much higher than 7% in any given year, and a large chance that it will be much lower than 7%. So we aggregate those results to kind of see a projected range of the potential future contribution needs and, again, funded status. If we can move forward to slide 8. The next section, again, covers some of the demographic risks to the plan. We're actually not highlighting any of these within this presentation. Last year, we highlighted section 3.1, which had to do with differences in member mortality, so death rates among the members. What we saw when we did highlight that was that it was not a large source of volatility in the contribution rates. And one thing to keep in mind, obviously, there's still a big unknown related to future life expectancy and given the current environment. But do remember that every time we perform a valuation, it is quote unquote trued up, right? So each valuation that we perform, we use the members as of that current date. So the 12/31/2020 valuation was based on the members and the death experience recognized through 2020. And now again, when we move forward to the next valuation, we will again recognize the actual death experience during 2021. So again, there is that unknown about how our expectations moving forward might be changing, but do remember that we are recognizing the actual death experience in each valuation. If we can move forward to slide 11. So contribution risks. Again, there is a very large risk to the plan if the contributions are not made. One thing that we always say, there's no way to replace not paying the bill, right? I mean, if the contributions aren't being made, then it doesn't really matter what the assumptions are. It doesn't matter how you're amortizing payments or how you're smoothing. If the contribution and the money isn't getting into the plan, that's the most important. It's very, very hard to fight uphill out of that. So we do highlight some of these risks of what would happen to the plan if contributions are not received. And one of them, the first one, is reduced funding of the ADC. Basically, if the contribution was not made during a given year, and then if it took a period to work the amount back into the budget to get back up to that full funding level. We'll walk through that one. And one thing to keep in mind through all of these scenarios is that future contribution amounts in this are just shown as an illustrative purpose. It is neither recommended nor expected that any missed contributions will happen. CSRS has a very strong history of receiving all of the contributions from the employers. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Craig to walk through a couple of the highlighted scenarios.
Great, thank you, Chris. If we could, all right, move to the next slide, please. All right, and one more, sorry. All right, so Chris mentioned these as he went through his presentation, but we're going to look at highlights from 3 sections of the report. Section 2.3 dealing with liquidity. 2.4 is that stochastic simulation of future volatility and investment performance relative to our 7% assumption. And then finally, 4.1 is a 5-year reduction in the ADC, the funding of contributions from to the system, and what impact that has on future contributions and the future funded ratio of the plan. So if we can move to slide 14, please. All right, first, the ADC and the actuarial models determine a contribution so that when people are due benefits and benefit payments need to begin, the money's there to pay them. So that's just the general structure of all the mathematical funding method models that we use. What SERS has is they have a capital preservation investment policy target right now that was reduced from 28% down to 21%. But even with a 21% target, you're still able to cover 86 months of benefit payments. So you're still well positioned should there be a downturn in investments to use those liquid assets to pay benefits. And not sell other assets that are more likely to rebound at a reduced value. So you want to be able to hold on to the assets that may be down. If it's equities, you want to allow them to rebound. So having this type of liquidity and having 86 months of payments allows you to avoid a double hit of getting a downturn in your assets and then having to sell those assets and not being part of a rebound. Next slide, please. So what we did is we looked at kind of an extreme scenario here. We said, what if the investment return was negative 20% in each of the next 3 years? So you're supposed to earn 7% according to the plan's assumption, and instead you're going to lose 20%. So that's a 27% loss from an actuarial perspective in each of those years. So if we look down at the ADC table, your baseline contributions, for that 5-year period, as of fiscal 22, there's not going to be any change because it's going to first, come into the fiscal year 23 contribution. But you can see that, out in fiscal year 26, there's a pretty big difference in the contribution requirements due to this type of loss. It's, about $2.1 billion is the contribution under baseline, and, $1.2 billion larger at $3.3 billion is the contribution if you were to have these negative 20% investment returns for 3 years. So there would be a substantial increase in the ADC. But when we looked at this and we looked at, if the ADC, the actuarially determined contribution is made, even with this extreme scenario, you still have 6 years of benefit payments covered through the liquid side of your assets, and you can still avoid having to liquidate, at unfavorable values, your equities and other investments that you're looking for a rebound on. So again, that's a pretty extreme scenario, but it does show that having 6 years of benefit payments in that scenario is still, a very favorable position to be in to kind of weather that storm. Next slide, please. All right, so the next one, Callan provided us with, a set of 5,000 simulated 20-year returns. So they're using their model. They're looking at the target allocation, and they're, producing a Monte Carlo simulation of all these 20-year returns. And then what we do is we take those returns and group them, and the next slide will show how we group those returns. So baseline is just our current 7% assumption. So the 95th percentile, so the higher the percentile, the more unfavorable returns we're talking about. So at the 95th percentile, that means, we're talking about a rather unlikely scenario, but we're talking about very unfavorable returns. And when we're talking about a 5th percentile, we're talking about very favorable returns, but still a very unlikely scenario. What we're focusing on a little more is between that 75th and 25th percentile. So that's 50% of the simulations that they gave us fall between that 75th and 25th percentile, with 75th percentile being an unfavorable return scenario and the 25th percentile being a favorable return scenario. So even though that covers 50% of the scenarios and it's what we would consider our likely range, still 50% of the possibilities are outside of that based on the Monte Carlo simulation, the stochastic simulation that we were provided. Next slide, we'll see what kind of impact these returns have. So at the 95th percentile, again, those are unlikely, very unfavorable returns. You can see that the current contribution level of $2.1 billion heads up pretty high and gets up to almost $5 billion in contribution out in fiscal year 2040. So if you were to have, just 20 years of very unfavorable returns overall, on average during that 20-year period, your contribution would more than double during that period. In the very favorable side, the 5th percentile, the blue dotted line, we're looking at a steep decline in the contribution where it gets down to the floor contribution. And currently in law, the contribution to the plan can't go below the normal cost. So it won't go to zero, when it won't go to negative. It'll go down to a kind of a minimum level that it can't go under. And the plan will still receive contributions going forward, even if you had excellent returns like the 5th percentile estimates. But the bigger focus here is kind of the baseline. You're going from current $2.1 billion contribution, and I'd like to look at 2040. That's before some of the amortizations drop off and the costs start to go down. But you're looking at $2.2 billion as your contribution in 2040 under a baseline. And that 25th percentile, if you have favorable returns, then we're looking at a contribution that would be half that at $1.1 billion. But if you had unfavorable returns at the 75th percentile, you could have a contribution that's $1.6 billion higher at $3.8 billion. On the next slide, instead of looking at the contributions, we're going to invert what we saw on the prior page. So if your investments are doing well, your funded ratio is going to go up. So where the lines went down on the prior page or up, they're going to reverse and go in the opposite order on this page. So at that 5th percentile, your funded ratio is going to be, through the roof and up at, 175% out, by December 31, 2040, which would be a great thing to have to deal with. But again, that's a very unlikely scenario. Just as the 95th percentile is unlikely, but you could be down below 50% funded if that situation were to arise. Finally, the main range, or the baseline is I like the way the baseline worked out this year, because we're projecting that as of December 31, 2040, you're going to be at 100%, and that's a good number. We like that number. We like numbers above that too for a funded ratio. But I think it paints a nice picture, and then it gives you a good, relative value, from 100%, where you might be in these different scenarios. And then, so at the 75th percentile, which would be likely unfavorable returns, you could be down at 68%, instead of 100%. And then at the 25th percentile, the favorable, upper range, would be 120% funded. All right. So that's it for 2.4. We can go to the next slide, please. All right, so then our final scenario that we're looking at from the report is from section 4.1, and this is saying what if a contribution less than the actuarially determined contribution were made. If collars were reimposed in a sense, and they, for 5 years you made reduced contributions. You made no contribution in fiscal year 22, which everybody knows is not what's being made. Contributions are being made. This is strictly a what if scenario, and then you went up 20% per year. So instead of contributing the ADC in fiscal 23, you contribute 23% of the newly determined ADC, then 40%, 60%, 80%. And then finally in fiscal 27, you're back to 100% of the ADC. So that's the scenario setup. The next slide will show us what kind of impact that has. So first let's deal with the solid lines, and then we'll go into the dashed line. The black line is your baseline, so that's where we expect your contribution to go. Currently $2.1 billion out in again, I'm going to take you to fiscal 2040 before the amortization pieces start dropping off, but you're up to $2.2 billion at that point. Now, what happens in the solid red line is if you're making less of a contribution than what you should be making, your cost is going to go up. You have to fund that the contribution that you didn't make is funded over a 30-year amortization period. So what happens is as the contribution is at 0, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, your actual payments are going to creep up because you're going to have to make those up over 30-year amortization periods. And ultimately, it leads to roughly a $600 million additional contribution for, on average, what might be 30 years of $600 million of additional contributions per year. So ultimately, instead of being in fiscal 2040 at $2.2 billion, you're up at $2.8 billion as the contribution due to not making those contributions when they were due. All right, slide 22. And again, if you're not contributing what you're supposed to be contributing, it's going to have an impact on your funded ratio. So what we're seeing here is that, the funded ratio currently at 59%, and like the baseline at December 31, 2040 is 100%. So if the system were underfunded, according to that 2040 or 0, 2040, 60, 80 scenario, then as of 2040, you would be at 91% funded, is our projected estimate. Okay, so that's the end of the scenarios, and one more, next slide, please. Here's our conclusions. All right, so the 2021 report will give you a lot more information, but it really is an analysis of the major risks that we see and kind of the impact that those will have on your projected actuarially determined contributions and on projected funded ratios. So right now, the policy that you have in place of making the ADC as the contribution each year does provide a very stable way to ensure that the assets are there to pay benefits when they come due. Your current capital preservation policy, with respect to liquidity, is providing ample protection, should there be a downturn and allowing you to avoid selling assets at unfavorable rates. And your annual monitoring of these different risks, these major risks, really allows CERS to adapt to any changes that may come your way. That is the end, and the slide or two later is questions, so we'll open it up to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Chris and Craig. It's very informative. Any questions from the members of the committee or from other members of the board? Okay. As a person who's been receiving these reports over the last few years, it's been a very enlightening process for me and very helpful for planning purposes, and to see where that the end is in sight, that the 100% fully funded is on the timeline, and that's good to see. All right. If there are no further questions or comments, a motion is in order. Let me see, to accept this report. A motion is in order to recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board approve the 2021 Stress Testing and Risk Assessment Report prepared by CERS Actuary, Korn Ferry. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Sarah, will you be doing the roll call for us, please?
Yes, I'll do the roll call.
Thank you.
Senator DeSanto?
Aye.
Chairman Philman?
Aye.
Mr. Acco?
Aye.
Committee Chair Soderberg?
Aye.
And Mr. Flanagan?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
Thank you. The motion passes. The next order of business, we've got some discussion items. The first being our budget presentation for 2022-23. So that's the budget that begins next July already. Sarah, will you and Tom be taking the lead on this one?
Yes, we will. Thanks, Mary. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah McSturdy. I'm CERS Chief Financial Officer, and like Mary said, I'm here to present a normal, regular annual item to the committee. It's the CERS fiscal year 22-23 budgets. This is under item 6A in board docs. Before I get started, I have one of my team members here with me today. His name is Tom Inners. And Tom played a critical role in the process of developing the budget. So I just want to take a minute for him to introduce himself. So Tom, if you can get on camera and just say a few words.
Good morning. As Sarah indicated, my name is Tom Inners, and I am the Fiscal Management Specialist for CSRS. I have been with CSRS for about a year and a half. Prior to joining the Office of Financial Management, my background was in corporate accounting in the private sector for roughly 25 years. I worked very closely with Sarah in preparing the defined benefit plan, administrative and investment budgets, as well as the defined contribution and deferred compensation budgets. Over the past year or so, I have improved processes and developed tools to both aid CSRS business areas in their data submission and enable Sarah as CFO to conduct a more streamlined and efficient review of the multiple budgets CSRS maintains. I have also developed a positive and mutually beneficial relationship with the Governor's Budget Office, not only with our primary contact, but also with other several subject matter experts within the Governor's Budget Office. It has been my privilege to work with Sarah and the rest of the CSRS finance team and the other CSRS business areas, and I look forward to the continued growth to ensure that CSRS continues to provide the best service that we can do to the Budget Office and other stakeholders.
Thank you, Tom. We, over the last couple of years, we've talked about the turnover that we've been having in our financial offices and the task of bringing on new people and training them and just the learning curve. But as we all know, one of the great benefits of bringing on new people is we bring in new skill sets, we bring in new ideas, we bring in experience from other public agencies, but also from the private sector. So thank you, Tom, for joining us.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for those kind words. Appreciate it. And thanks, Tom. I really rely a lot on Tom for this entire process. So if you can go to the next slide. Today we'll cover the background of the budget requirements, and then we'll do the budget for the defined benefit plan. We'll cover the administrative budget, directed commissions related to the administrative budget, and the investment budget. And then we'll move on to the defined contribution plan budget. And finally, I'll cover the deferred compensation plan budget. So if you can go to the next slide. So a little bit of background about the budget process, and Mary's probably quite familiar with this. But CSRS complies with the manual 110.01, which is entitled Budget Instructions, and it's issued by the Governor's Budget Office, and this provides detailed instructions to state agencies on how to prepare and submit agency budget requests. In line with the GBO instructions, CSRS continues to think critically about our goals and the services we provide and how we can collectively achieve efficiencies without compromising our core responsibilities to our members, participants, and other stakeholders. The budgets are due to the Governor's Budget Office by October 6th, 2021. And then furthermore, as some of you may be familiar with, we also provide information to the House and Senate Appropriations Committee in January of each year. So if you could go to the next slide. The first budget I'm going to cover is the defined benefit plan, and here on slide 4 you can see the administrative budget component. Just a little bit about the setup of the table. If you focus on the right-hand side of the table, the fiscal year 22-23 request is the current year request. The prior year, fiscal year 21-22, rebudget is in the middle column, and then any fluctuations are in the left-hand number column right there. So if you focus on the right-hand column, the budget is made up of about 60% of personnel costs, which is salary and various benefits. And you can see year over year, it's a slight increase. That increase was offset by a slight decrease in our operating expenses, and I'll touch on those in a future slide. We also have some fixed assets that we budget for. And the total of that budget is then reduced by directed commissions, and I'll touch on that on the next slide. So at the bottom of the right-hand column, you can see that the total budget for the administrative side for the defined benefit plan for fiscal year 22-23 is $33,048,000, which is down slightly over prior year. You go to the next slide. Now a little bit more about directed commissions. Directed commissions are reimbursements to CERS for a portion of fees paid to brokers for executing a trade on behalf of CERS. CERS is allowed to use directed commissions if needed to pay expenses, which is why we reduce the ask on the administrative fund budget by a portion of the directed commissions each year. In the past few years, we have not been in a position to have to dip into this reserve. You can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to point out a few items on key operational items on the defined benefit plan administrative budget. There's been some reduction in costs related to the CIRRUS 2.0, bringing maintenance and support in-house instead of contracting for it from an outside vendor. There's been some decrease in the current year budget, but the full cost savings will be realized in future years when CIRRUS 2.0 goes live and a full reliance on the contractors is eliminated. I just want to note that Mary has requested and Dan Krautheim has agreed to give an update on CIRRUS 2.0 at the December meeting. So those reductions have been offset by increases for various items. One is increased costs to extend, enhance, and test CERS cybersecurity posture, which is very important and part of our strategic plan. There are also increased costs associated with remediation of our data center findings, which is also very critical and part of our strategic plan. There are also other costs being included in this budget for specialized services for the potential for 2 engagements. One is an actuarial audit, and that's required by a board policy, and the potential for a service organization control report or a SOC audit. This is required by Act 2020-128. But the timing on these are flexible, so we're just budgeting just in case they were to happen during this fiscal year. You can move to the next slide. Next, we have the defined benefit plan, the investment budget. This budget includes the investment-related expenses associated with the defined benefit plan's investment portfolio. As you can see with this budget, personnel increased slightly. It went up to 5.3 from 5.2, but that was offset by a slight decrease in operations. It's 6.3 in the current year, and it was 6.4 in the prior year. The total ask is basically flat year over year at 11.6. Examples of major operating expenses that we budget for in this fund are subscriptions, investment consultants, and software. So if you can move to the next slide. Now we have the defined contribution plan, and next we're going to have the deferred compensation plan. But before I get into that, each one of these plans has personnel costs associated with it. And I just wanted to state that these personnel costs are mostly allocated costs from other funds. These are for staff that work in other CERS business areas that work on these plans, and they focus on providing participant services, education, communications, finance, investment, making sure the TPA has the same strategic vision as we have. So basically everything to make sure that the plans are run in a timely and efficient manner. So we do some salary allocations, and that's where these personnel costs come from. So in this budget, you can see on the right-hand side, we do have some increase in personnel costs here again, offset by a decrease in operating. At the bottom of the right-hand column, the total ask for the current year is $4.4 million, which is relatively flat to what we budgeted for in the prior year, which was 4.4. Once again, examples of major operating expenses include the third-party administrator fee. That's the largest operating cost that we have, and that's paid on all accounts, participant accounts. We have investment consulting costs, audit costs, and also some allocated IT costs. But one thing I'd like to note that in this budget, we are including the reduction of fees that was communicated earlier on in the year, I believe in March, that the TPA has reduced their monthly cost from $4.95 a month to $4.65 a month. You can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to give you a reminder of some of the other information that we covered earlier on in the year, especially during February. There was an education session, and we talked a lot about this in March. The costs for this plan are covered by required sources of funding. For example, now we can use invested employer contributions, and we're expecting them to be about $1.6 million. And then we also institute a per participant charge to our employers. Prior to fiscal year 2021, the cost of administering the plan was paid by the Commonwealth, but then we moved towards this per participant charge to employers starting in fiscal year 2021. And I just want to...
Sarah, we need to move forward on the slide. We should be on slide 9, I believe.
Yeah. What does everybody else see? I see slide 9.
Slide 9.
Okay. Must
Maybe
be mine.
Okay, give it a second. Maybe it'll catch up.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'd just like to note again, the fees, costs, and expenses and sources of funding will continue to be evaluated and monitored, since this plan was, as we mentioned, a few times prior, it was developed in a very short amount of time, and it's still in its infancy stage. You go to the next slide. This should be slide 10. Finally, we have the deferred compensation plan. This budget includes the cost to administer our voluntary deferred compensation plan. I just want to note that these costs exclude any third-party administrator fee, unlike the defined contribution plan, because the participants do pay this fee out of their accounts. So for this budget, we're asking about $1.5 million, split between personnel and operating costs. Example of some operating expenses include investment consulting costs, audit costs, and custodian fees. You can go to the next slide. This is slide 11. And once again, just a reminder of some things that we touched on previously in this calendar year. The costs and expenses of this plan are mainly covered by revenue allocation as per our contract with Empower in the amount of $275,000. And then also an administrative fee on participants' accounts that was approved in a March meeting by the board and became effective July 1st, 2021. Once again, with this plan, where the fees, costs, expenses, and sources of funding will continue to be evaluated and monitored. So we could go to the next slide. This is the last slide. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Sarah. I know this has been an interesting year implementing this new funding system for our funds. All right. A motion is in order to recommend this budget proposal. So a motion is in order to recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board approve for fiscal year 2022-2023 the following proposed budgets. Number 1, SERS administrative budget. 2, SERS investment budget. 3, State Employees Defined Contribution Plan budget. And 4, Commonwealth State Employees Deferred Compensation Plan budget, each substantially in the same form as presented in the Chief Financial Officer's September 28, 2021 report, and each is amended and are ultimately approved by the Office of the Budget. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Sarah, would you do a roll call, please?
Sure. Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Chairman Philman,
Aye.
Mr. Acco,
Aye.
Committee Chair Soderberg,
Aye.
and Mr. Flanagan.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
The motion carries. Thank you all. The next order of business is an update on the financial management update by Sarah McSurdy. So Sarah?
Thanks, Mary. This is another normal item that I present almost every meeting. This is the Office of Financial Management update. The material can be found in board docs under item 6B. You go to the next slide. In this presentation, today I'll be covering some highlights of the Office of Financial Management activities, and then I'll provide a high-level overview of the defined benefit plan, defined contribution plan, and deferred compensation plan, statements of changes in fiduciary net position, all for the period ending June 30th, 2021. You go to the next slide. So, in regard to providing highlights of the Office of Financial Management activities, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach today. In speaking with Committee Chair Soderberg, she's interested in learning more about what we do and how we operate. She's even mentioned coming into the building to take a tour when it's obviously safe to do so. In the past, I've touched on staffing, reorganization, deliverables, achievements, and major projects. For this update, I would like to share a little bit more about a different message regarding our operations. As you can imagine, the Office of Financial Management has normal daily, weekly, and monthly work that keeps staff busy with mission essential functions that focus on administering all financial transactions, including member, participant, and employer contributions, member and participant benefit payments, investment purchases, sales, mark-to-market, and other activity. On top of that, we then have accountants call busy season. This layers on additional hours during the January through June timeframe related to major items such as our budget book, IRS filings, year-end financial statements for all of our plans, going through plan audits with our external auditors, the annual comprehensive financial report, and assisting with the actuarial evaluation census data, and then also producing a GASB 68 report for all of our employers. You've seen these items in previous updates that I provided, and most of these deliverables are available on our public website. We navigate the peaks and valleys of being busy versus other portions of the year. And for this update, I'm going to report that we've been taking advantage of the second half of the calendar year by working on projects, both in the strategic plan and others, and also evaluating processes to see where we can add additional controls or be more efficient. Documenting or updating documentation for processes in place, and ensuring staff that went through busy season for the first time with the 2020 financial close are better prepared and ready to add more value the second time through the surge. We've been doing that by training, knowledge sharing, and collaborating amongst team members to show how tasks affect the big picture, among other things. As reported, and as Mary just mentioned, in February 2021, I stated that OFM was short-staffed for a good period of time. We've had 11 team members join us. That's more than 40% of our total OFM team during 2020 and 2021 timeframe. So the team is continuously progressing and taking the necessary steps to get to where we need to be. Additionally, Michael and I continue to build a culture under our leadership that's in line with our core values. All of this is a dance and a balance act because I want to challenge staff during the second half of the year to make the overdue and needed improvements, but I also want to balance the workload in order to prevent burnout. So overall, I'm proud of the hard work and dedication that all of the OFM staff has shown during the past few months, and I'm proud that they're working together to improve the Office of Financial Management. So if you can go to the next slide. So next I'm going to go into the statement of changes for the 3 plans. The first statement that I'm going to cover is for the defined benefit plan. If you focus on the right-hand column, the year-to-date column, you can see at the very top that we started the year with approximately $35 billion in assets. Going down to the additions, we had employer contributions of approximately $1.8 billion over the past 6 months. This includes PASHE's lump sum payment into the plan. We've had member contributions of $198 million. And then we've also had net investment income, which was very valuable to the fund, adding $2.8 billion to the plan. And then if you go down to the deductions, our benefit payments and refunds totaled $1.8 billion, and our administrative expenses were about $12 million. The additions outweigh the deductions by approximately $2.9 billion, and we ended June at approximately $38 billion in net position restricted for pensions. If you go to the next slide. On the defined contribution plan, once again focusing on the right-hand side, the year-to-date, we started out the year with about $40.5 million. And then under additions, you can see that employers contributed about $4.9 million. Participants contributed about $8.1 million. Participants also transferred in approximately $1.2 million over those 6 months. And then once again, favorable investment performance added about $4.5 million to the plan fund. Under deductions, benefit payments and refunds, and plan transfers out totaled just about $400,000 collectively. And then the third party and other administrative expenses totaled about $1 million. The total additions outweigh the total deductions by about $17.1 million, and the plan ended June with approximately $57.6 million. Go to the next slide. This is slide 6. Lastly, I'll cover and give an update on the voluntary deferred compensation plan. Once again, focusing on the right-hand side, year-to-date amounts. The plan began the year with approximately $4.4 billion in assets. And then under additions, you can see that participants contributed about $86 million. And they also transferred or rolled over into the plan about $35 million. Positive investment performance also added about $335.6 million, bringing total additions to $456.7 million. Under deductions over the past 6 months, benefit payments and refunds were about $55 million, and then transfers or rollovers out of the plan were about $85 million. Third party and other administrative expenses were approximately $2.8 million. The deductions ended up totaling $143 million. The additions outweighed the deductions by approximately $313 million, and the plan ended June at approximately $4.7 million in assets. So if you could go to the next slide. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the committee or from other board members? Thank you, Sarah, and please give our appreciation to your entire team.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, the next order of business is an update on the Office of Member and Participant Services by Joe Torta. Joe?
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. For those of you that don't know me, I think everybody does, but just in case, I'm Joe Torta. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Member and Participant Services here at the State Employees Retirement System. There's 4 things I want to cover today as briefly as possible. First, I'd like to do something that I haven't done before, but after speaking with Mary, I want to make a couple of staff introductions. I'd like you to meet my bureau directors. They're the people that really do the work here under me. I want to talk about us opening our regional counseling centers, finally, after a year and a half. I want to talk about the direct deposit initiative, which is a major initiative that CSRS has just undertaken and some of the results that we're seeing. And I also want to bring you up to speed on the current working environment, what it's like for employees in the Office of Member and Participant Services and what they're dealing with as it relates to providing customer service to a very anxious group of state employees out there, considering the circumstances. But first and foremost, I have two bureau directors, two bureaus under me, the Bureau of Benefit Administration and the Bureau of Member and Participant Services. I have asked both Kevin Skura and Leah Woodward to go on camera. I had hoped to do these introductions in person, but circumstances just didn't permit that. Kevin Skura is the Director of the Bureau of Benefit Administration. He's been with CSRS for over 18 years in multiple positions in the Office of Member and Participant Services, and he's been in his current capacity for 2 years. Kevin oversees two divisions. The Membership Services Division, which maintains all aspects of active member and participant accounts, as well as all purchases of previous state and military service. The second division is Benefit Determination, and these are the business units that process and pay all retirement, disability retirement, refund, and death benefits. Kevin's the go-to person to get people paid, and I rely on him very heavily. Second is Leah Woodward. Leah is the director of the Bureau of Member and Participant Services. She just took over for Dave Tarsi, a longtime employee who recently retired, and she oversees all aspects of retirement counseling and retiree health care in both our central office and the regional field offices. Leah has been with CSRS for approximately 8.5 years. Prior to her current appointment, she was in charge of all customer service matters for participants in the defined contribution and the deferred compensation plans and worked extensively with Empower in that capacity. And previous to that, Leah was on point for CSRS to internally coordinate the implementation of Act 5, which included the adoption of the hybrid and defined contribution account types. Major responsibilities on her part. So the reason I'm introducing Kevin and Leah today is if you, your constituents, your coworkers, friends, relatives, or neighbors have received or are in need of customer service, it is under the direction of Kevin Skura or Leah Woodward. I didn't ask them to make a statement, but I am pleased to introduce them to the committee today. So I thank you very much, Kevin and Leah. Second, earlier this month, on September the 7th, we made the decision for the first time in 18 months to reopen all 7 of our regional field offices to the public. This included in-person counseling for members that request it. Empower also opened its Harrisburg office on September 7th in coordination with our openings. Now, prior to the COVID-19 shutdown, which was March of last year, feels like 100 years ago, but March of last year, an in-person meeting was absolutely required by CSRS for employees to apply for their retirement benefits. During the extended shutdown, counseling was shifted to by phone with all documents being received through the mail. It was imperfect, but it kept the process moving and it kept the members, the participants, and the CSRS employees as safe as possible under the circumstances. Going forward, the method we use to counsel the members and participants will be determined by the members and participants. Not everybody is comfortable with one-on-one meetings. We're finding that out, and that's fine. We've made accommodations for that, even though we have all the governor's safety protocols in place in our field offices. If members and participants want to meet in person, we will do that. If they're not comfortable, and again, many are not, we will handle the counseling over the telephone. We're working to employ teams as a third option whenever possible, but quite frankly, most members don't have that capability. We're only 3 weeks in to the opening of our field offices, so far data is just starting to develop, but approximately 30% of our retiring members have elected in-person counseling. 70% prefer to be counseled by phone. We're going to be watching this very closely to see how it evolves over time and to make our business model as accommodating as possible to the Commonwealth employees. And the other thing we want to do, and we're working, is to expand teams because it's preferable going forward to talking to someone on the telephone. Especially as our hybrid members start to retire in larger numbers, it will enable us to empower or to tie Empower into counseling for the defined contribution component of the participants' hybrid accounts. So we're looking at expanding that going forward. Third is the direct deposit initiative. On September 15th, just a couple of weeks ago, CERS sent approximately 6,700 letters out to the remaining annuitants that received their monthly payments by paper check. The ultimate goal was to have every annuitant on direct deposit and to receive their benefit payment securely and electronically on the last working day of the month. CERS has been requiring all new retirees to set up direct deposit for many years now, but there are still over 6,000 paper checks that remain mailed out every month. I'm pleased to say that even after just a few weeks, the initial response has been very good, and we're getting a tremendous number of people converting to electronic payment. But just to give you an idea of who we're dealing with, at this point, the annuitants still receiving paper checks, on average, have been retired over 21 years and are over 71 years old. That's the average. So we're tiptoeing into this very carefully with the elderly, because the vast majority of these people are extremely aged and not completely comfortable with technology. But we're hoping that this initiative is the first step in a sequence of steps to convert the remaining 6,700 retirees. And last, I want to talk about the environment that staff are currently working in. I talked to Terry about this a few days ago, and she thought it was really critical that I try to explain to the board what the COVID-19 environment has required of staff here at CERS internally. The conversion to and from telework and the COVID-19 environment has really taken its toll on the CERS members and participants across the Commonwealth. No agency is immune to this. The extended period of constant adjustment and readjustment, as well as outside employment opportunities that may have never existed before, has made a disproportionately high number of people in the middle of a contract cycle, which is very unusual, evaluate their employment options and contact CERS for information related to their retirement accounts. Turnover has been high across the Commonwealth since March of 2020, and it remains so today. I introduced you to my bureau directors. Staff in both Kevin Skura and Leah Woodward's business areas have borne the brunt of the high member activity and high anxiety levels. Simple account maintenance things has had an increase in volume. Things like members reevaluating their beneficiaries. They're nervous about their health. They want to make sure their beneficiaries are up to date. If they have uncovered time, they're all requesting purchases of service to make sure that their accounts are complete. They've asked for retirement estimates because they're considering other employment opportunities. If they have a power of attorney they've been meeting to put in place, they're hitting CERS with a considerable number of powers of attorney to process. Domestic relations orders. We've seen an increase in domestic relations orders, not necessarily due to COVID, but we've certainly seen it over the last year and a half. CERS staff are required to process and put those in place. Death benefit processing has been higher, and it's been higher for quite some time. Non-vested refund payments. When you have people that tenure vesting in the new retirement tiers and people that are moving to outside employment, many are non-vested and we have to process refunds. All of these things, simple account maintenance things that we do every day, are being required to be done in high volume, and they are in addition to a very high number of retirements this calendar year and in 2020. That has not subsided one bit. And I want to stress that this has been in a level of high anxiety with the members. People are nervous, people are scared, and we're just trying to keep them calm and explain their benefits and give them the best customer service possible under the circumstances. I want to close with, if you ask my staff, they would probably say that compliments from me really need to be earned. But I want to say for the committee and for the chair and for the executive director that I would consider the performance of the staff, the Office of Member and Participant Services, exemplary since the onset of COVID, and considering the circumstances they're currently working in, because it's been a struggle, not just for the Commonwealth employees, but for CERS employees with COVID-19 in their homes, in their lives, and as well as in their business units, which we've seen extensively. So that is my report, Mary. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Joe?
Yeah, Mary, just a comment if I could.
Please go ahead, Mr. Feldman.
And Joe, I appreciate not only what you do and all your staff. As I've said many times, a majority of the members are union members.
and to exacerbate the problem. I'm glad you brought us up to date as far as the problems that everybody's having, and the folks and the members who are deciding to retire. To exacerbate the problem, we're not hiring a lot of people either. So you have someone that's sitting there in their office contemplating pension and retirement, and in the meantime, he sees his fellow employees leaving for whatever reasons. They're not bringing folks in, so their workload is increased, dramatically. So some are saying, let's get out of here at that point. So very enlightening. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I agree with the chairman's comments. This has been a very unusual year and a half, a lot of stress on everyone. And I can honestly say I hadn't really thought about how the ripple effect affects an office like yours, Joe. So thank you. And please express our appreciation and gratitude to all of your staff on behalf of the committee.
I have a meeting coming up with all staff, and I will do that, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. All right. Any other comments or questions from anyone? All right, let's move on. We've got a couple of informational items that are on your agenda. We're not going to discuss these, but they are available for you to review at your leisure. Next item, we will be going into executive session. Do we have somebody ready to set this up?
Yes, good morning, Mary, and good morning, members of the committee. We will be going into executive session now, as Mary just said. Under the Sunshine Act, the board is permitted to hold an executive session for any of the 7 reasons listed in the statute, one of which is to review and to discuss agency business, which, if conducted in public, would violate a lawful privilege or would lead to the disclosure of information protected by law. The purpose of today's executive session is to discuss developments in case law and to advise the board about retirement crediting of certain payments. Holding that discussion in public would disclose information protected by the attorney-client privilege, and therefore the Sunshine Act permits this discussion to be held in executive session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
Before we enter into executive session, please give us a minute to make a few technical changes here in the boardroom on your behalf. We'll make you aware when the appropriate changes have successfully been made. As a reminder, the public meeting will resume on this live stream connection when the executive session is complete.
Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. Please proceed.
Joe, do you need to make a statement that we're non-public?
No, that is not necessary.
All right, thank you. Once again, this is the Finance and Member Services Committee meeting. I would like to bring this meeting to a close. Any comments, concerns, or questions from the committee members? All right. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries. This concludes the meeting of the Finance and Member Services Committee. Our next meeting is scheduled for either December 7th or December 8th of 2021. Thank you all very much.
And on to the Investment Committee meeting.